Does Pokemon need voice acting? Yeah, kinda. So this weekend's Pokemon discussion ended up being around voice acting, with this tweet going around, a lot of people seeing this, and obviously this is the the infamous Piers clip. It's actually a quote tweet of this reply to a whole chain that's all Pokemon versus Power World discourse, ooh, boo-hoo, wah-wah, yet again. But I think the more important one was this here, where someone was replying, what does it matter? And this quote here, it says, why does it matter that Pokemon doesn't have voice acting? Because Pokemon has scenes like this. And it's the Piers clip, you know the one, and I don't even have to play the audio because there's not really anything here. And this is a topic that I discussed quite a few times on the main channel, but I feel like, maybe that's a dead horse I've beaten on the main channel, so it's still worth talking about here because, again, this is what has been going around on Pokemon Twitter this weekend of people quote tweeting and kind of memeing on this as well, just putting other funny scenes in the quotes, but taking away the audio, or at least taking away the dialogue. And I definitely think that this is a great argument for voice acting in Pokemon, and it's something that I, before, maybe not necessarily thought it was something it needed, especially like at the beginning of the 3D games, or at least all the 3D games on the 3DS. However, in the post-Nintendo Switch world, I definitely do agree that we should have voice acting in Pokemon. Not all the time. I've said that basically what I think we should get is the voice acting that we see in Pokemon Masters, where voices are there for important things, especially trailers. Trailers are just about, I don't want to say fully voiced, but they have quite a few voice lines. And then there are other little voice lines that are played here and there, little sounds by each character for smaller moments. But I feel that if it's going to be a full-on cutscene, yes, that should be voiced. Or, even a moment like this. I don't think this one counts as a cutscene, but basically, just some little grunts or other sounds here and there for when characters are talking. And then most of the dialogue, yes, can just be text that you read. However, if we're going to be getting full-on moments like this, then yes, those should be voiced. Especially this one. I don't think it was too difficult to maybe have a song, or, make an original song. And I'd say not too difficult, but not too difficult for Pokemon and Nintendo, especially too, like, well, we've been getting a bunch of songs after Sword and Shield, maybe not necessarily by Pokemon, but we had the whole Project Miku stuff going on. There was that one song, the music video for Acacia for by Bumpo Chicken, right? That was a band, but the point remains is that we've gotten a lot of Pokemon related music, so you totally could have prepared something for this. It didn't even necessarily need to be in English or be English translated, or heck, we got the musical episode of Poketoon translated into English as well. But what I'm saying is that I don't think we need too much. However, if Pokemon is leaning more toward this cinematic feeling, if it wants to have these moments, then I think it's necessary. Yeah, like I said, we don't need it for every single line of dialogue spoken in it. However, it's definitely needed. And I know that Pokemon is one of those games that does turn around very quickly. However, maybe potentially with Winds and Waves coming soon, and having a pretty decent amount of time between Winds and Waves coming out and Scarlet and Violet coming out, that'd be something nice if they were cooking that up. And hopefully, if it happens, it would have to be announced soon or revealed soon. I think that with how far ahead the game was announced from a release date, it made sense for the first trailer for Winds and Waves to maybe not necessarily confirm it just yet. It could potentially be on the horizon. Again, they're showing a lot of nice stuff about this game. Visually, I think it looks pretty nice for a Pokemon game, and there's some nice promise of other adventure. And especially the way that the trailer was presented, it wasn't necessarily like heavy focused. I think, with Legends Arceus, they did have a narration leading up to the trailer. So there was a moment where we thought maybe that was going to be the game that introduces the voice acting to Pokemon. However, it wasn't necessarily. This one obviously being focused more so on showing you the world and showing you how the Pokemon are going to be looking and the environments are going to be looking. That was a focus, and none of the characters seem to be speaking here. And even then, we don't really have a focus on the characters. You just sort of show off the protagonist a bit. Like I said, the focus is a Pokemon. So, not necessarily hoping maybe a little bit. It would be nice, especially too because, yeah, we are now on the Nintendo Switch 2, so on and so on. We completely went past the Switch generation, and hopefully Pokemon's a lot more comfortable now, and maybe that's something we can get. Again, I understand logistically because Pokemon does have a worldwide release, and it is translated into multiple languages, which on top of that, they are adding new languages just about every generation into which the games are going to be translated. But again, that is just the text portion, so hopefully it could happen. I would expect in the next trailer, right, that has a little more story focus, a little more character focus, to be the confirmation whether or not we will have the voice acting in there. That's something they're definitely going to want to show off, something they're really going to want to advertise in the trailers. And like I said, you don't even really need it for every single moment in the game, but just the important cutscenes, which, like I said, are all the obvious stuff here that we see in Scarlet and Violet, all the fun little moments as well, because I think they definitely would have been a lot more advanced. Sword and Shield, I think, did a decent job with a majority of their cutscenes in showing the facial expressions. I always pull up the one with Sonya where, you know, she's discovering all the secrets about the Gala region and so on and so on. That one is a great cutscene that accomplishes what it needs to without a single line of dialogue, doing everything visually and just in the little animation facial expressions and so on, right? However, in Scarlet and Violet, there's a lot more text. There are some moments that would 100% be enhanced with actual dialogue here, and especially too with the story, how it eventually goes toward the end. And you know, that would be really nice. Where is it? The part with Professor Sada or Toro. Again, these are moments that would have been really great with some voice acting to kind of lead everything and make sure that it lands properly, especially too because like the dialogue is sort of the more important part here. And you know, don't get me wrong, there's some nice visuals and there's some nice facial expressions as well. However, definitely the vocal performances would have enhanced it a lot more so. Then, you know, I have been playing Digimon Time Stranger. I streamed it last week on the channel, give or take. And, you know, that one is a typical RPG game where, yes, it is voiced and there is actual voice acting. And especially in the English version too, it has been translated to English. And when you start at the game, you have a choice of English or Japanese. I'm not necessarily sure what it's like in other countries, if it has been voiced in that sense, but it is at least nice too, because, you know, the English speaking audience is the loud majority, minority, whatever. They're a good portion, and they're very loud when it comes to complaints, so they would be the ones who would be appeased by that. And yeah, even little small moments, even though there is actually like the little text here, these are all voice acted, and it's done pretty well too. And I will say that for me, this was a nice streaming experience, because going back to play older Pokemon games where I have never played them before, so I want to understand the story and I kind of want to take it in. I do have to read the dialogue, but because I'm streaming, I have to read it out loud for the streaming experience to make sure that everybody else watching is able to also get sort of the same experience, or to, you know, that I'm adding something a little more rather than me just like sitting here. However, that does take its toll on me as the streamer, and you know, oh boy, you know, streamers complaining about streaming. But the point is that playing Digimon Story Time Stranger, it was a little better of an experience in that when it came time for actual story portions, I could just kind of sit back, watch it, understand it, let it happen, you know, maybe give some commentary as well to it, and then that sort of lets me focus on the actual gameplay later on when it comes time for the gameplay. And it also, you know, helps you to get engrossed in that. So that's another like very specific to me sort of complaint. And again, like I said, my idea for Pokemon is that we're only going to have the cutscenes voice like that, and other little dialogue is gonna, you know, that's sort of the minimum, right? Digimon Story Time Stranger has been in development for years, and which, you know, Pokemon games are in development for years, but Time Stranger much more so, from what I know. A long time, and people have been waiting for that. And I'm not necessarily saying that Pokemon totally needs to come out with a game every year or so, and totally needs to turn around in the quick time that it does. I'm not necessarily saying maybe they should spend more time. I don't know how to allocate the resources. I'm not somebody there, right? For something of that magnitude, right? I don't know. Those are just some of my thoughts. Anyway, I've been enjoying Digimon Story Time Stranger. That's been a fun one. So let me know what you think in the comments below about voice acting in Pokemon. Would you like to see it in winds and waves? Do you think it's necessary? Or you know, what else do you want to hear from Pokemon in the future? You know, I even forgot to say, I forgot to give a shout out to Detective Pikachu Returns. That was a game I also streamed that I had a good experience with, because that one had voice acting. I know that is totally not the best Pokemon game out there. However, as a streamer, I had a good experience with that, enjoying the voice acting, and also, you know, playing it, what little gameplay there was in that one. So I would like that if we had something of that theming and that feeling, but with the full-on scale and the polish of a main series Pokemon game. And I say polish, and I know you're gonna get on me for that, on the Nintendo Switch 2 ***, and for what we're seeing of Winds and Waves, right? So Let me know what you think in the comments below about voice acting in Pokemon. Would you like to see it, or would you like to hear it, and to what degree? Like I said, my thoughts are just the cutscenes. That will be enough. Or moments like this that 100% need it. Pokemon doesn't need voice acting necessarily the entire game. However, if you're going to be making scenes like this, I better hear a person on the other end of that. Anyway, if you enjoyed watching, leave a like, subscribe, comment as well. That's very important to show your support here as we're continuing to grow this second channel. But anyway, this is GetRex. Now we'll catch you all later.